to everyone, and let's interact with everyone. The only downside of that is we've got exactly 1 hour, and if you do the math, that's less than 5 minutes apiece. So Anita is very sweet, but please do her a favor and contain yourselves to that. And the goal of this one is to simply understand where the funding sources come from, state, federal, states, local, one segment, and private. What's the name again?
He's right here.
Oh, you are he. How are you? I'm so sorry. I did not make the connection. Thank you for coming down. And then the second segment, those of you that have to navigate this world, we'll talk about that. Am I right? Does that bother you? You're not signing your eyes?
Oh,
it's
no.
kind of a useful reference.
Yes.
I think it's actually current.
Yeah, right.
Governance, so why would?
And then she was using old versions, and it was the whole thing. Again, much cleaner. They just sent it to me, and I said, "Hey, fix this, and we're good."
Well, with ULI and DC, we did the St. Elizabeth's advisory panel. And then this advisory, they have panel is no longer available. Remember that?
I think, Coast Guard over on that site, I mean, I'm happy for the Coast Guard, that's such a waste of that site.
Isn't it?
Because they're all enclosed, and, I mean, but they serve our country, they deserve a beautiful view, but the view from there is breathtaking.
Yeah. No, it was so exciting. Andy Altman and I really enjoyed that.
But,
Do you see much of Andy now?
oh yeah, all the time, I work with him on a lot of projects, and to this day, yeah.
Fabulous guy too.
Projects, and
good.
to this day, yeah.
Fabulous guy too.
Projects,
good.
and to this day, yeah.
Give it a couple more minutes. So we can slip a bit. You have a immediately after, right? I think you do. So make sure that that he has a chance to speak, because he may slip out and we could let this thing slip. The next one starts at 3:30. It's us as well. So we should just give 10 minutes in between, and I can give you the highlights.
Where to say that? Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
I saw you.
There we go. Yeah, all these people going that away.
I just don't have one.
I think
Yep, no, Stacy, have those down.
Me, you.
Stacy, I think that way, sunshine.
I don't, I'll go over there.
Rat, and, okay, we're good.
Just in case you lose your identity.
Let's see it. Lowercase d and all.
Good sell, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Did you stay for the whole session? Wasn't that?
There were some questions. Put it at 11:45.
Did you?
I was here for the question.
Ready? Ready? Doesn't matter if I don't have one.
What happened?
I just don't rate it.
Hey.
You got a crayon? Yeah. Let me put you on that whiteboard above it there.
Red letters.
That's right.
All right, I'll take care of that right now.
It's not a big deal.
Well, it is.
I'm a developer. I prefer to be anonymous.
Yeah, that's right. You don't with the money though. Don't give me that.
Do much better in the back. Yes. Hi.
Oh,
John
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Dan's my daughter's coach, soccer,
There you go.
and my niece, and partner in crime, and cousin, and friend, so.
Yeah,
I know
right.
Dan for many months.
Yeah, I know Dan a long time. He's a good guy.
Well, we're taking care of some. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second of our series of 6 panels on developing affordable housing. This morning we heard from 3 cities that have established very successful policies and implementation strategies. This afternoon we're going to have a little financing 101. I think I'm correct, Anita, in saying that we're gonna do 2 segments. One, we have everyone who represents the financing sources. And then we have a second segment with people that try to navigate the financing challenges of doing affordable housing by tapping into these many programs. I've already apologized to the panel, but I'd like to explain why a panel needs to have 15 experts and only 1 hour. So this whole series started as a hometown summit model, which has keynotes, which we had one this morning, and then literally has roundtables and in small rooms with little audience. And I was thinking, we're gonna get a bunch of experts staring at each other around the table for an hour, and they understand this. It's us, we don't understand it. So we made the decision to get our own space and to open it up. But I don't know how you're gonna introduce people, but there's not a single person here who we don't want to hear from, so here we are. And we hope to have questions at the end. But Anita Morrison is with PES, which stands for
Partners for Economic
Partners for
Solutions.
Economic Solutions. Anita is very well in the city right now because she is the consultant to the city doing the needs assessment, which will get discussed in the needs panel. But she has a wonderful overall understanding of this world as an economist. And she's very engaged in the city, and by way of dialogue through Thomas Jefferson Planning District, probably going to expand to look at the region, which is important. So with that, Anita, thank you for taking on these wonderful people. Thank you.
So at the risk of skimming over too quickly, we are going to keep everybody to 3 or 4 minutes to We're going to keep everybody to 3 or 4 minutes to help just lay the groundwork about how affordable housing is financed. So rather than spend all our time introducing everyone, I think we'll just do it very quickly as we go along. And we're going to start this afternoon with Grant Duffield, who's director of the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority. And he's going to give us sort of the broad brush of what happens at the federal level in terms of the resources available to people building affordable housing.
Thank you very much, Anita. Let's see. Greg asked me to pinch hit and provide sort of an overview, so I'm going to give it my best stab here. Okay. When we talk about financing for affordable housing from the federal government side, there's primarily funding available, budgeted through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That's the one of the primary funding sources. HUD has 4 separate departments. There's the community programs department. They've got Federal Housing Administration, got public and Indian housing, and then they have fair housing and equal opportunity. Now, out of that, the Federal Housing Administration that that's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, that's home ownership side. Community programs administers funds through Community Development Block Grant, which you'll probably hear some about. It's a potential financing mechanism to help offset affordable housing expenditures in some cases. Also, the Housing Trust Fund, when it was conceived, it's defunct at this point. Primarily, the funding that my agencies receive is coming through the Office of Public and Indian Housing. That is direct subsidy for public housing support, as well as funding for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The Housing Choice Voucher is what was Section 8 housing years ago when it started out. Other areas other sources of funding for affordable housing on the federal level, Department of Treasury has programs that support affordable housing development through Section 108 programs or through Community Development Finance Institution program funding. There's U.S. Department of Agriculture through Rural Development has funding available and loan guarantees available. Department of Defense through Veterans Affairs can help support affordable housing. Health and Human Services has limited funding available for special needs populations, as does FEMA, and that's more for a temporary fix for housing needs. Just to give you, is that broad enough? Okay, can I be done?
Yeah.
All right.
So the most important one is the Treasury program, low-income housing tax credits, which make money available by granting tax credits to investors in new housing that is designed to be a mix of incomes, but in fact now is primarily a vehicle for funding buildings that are totally affordable for people at 60% of the area median income or 50% typically. So that's a competitive program, and that's run by administered by Virginia Housing Development Authority. So I'm going to ask Mike Hawkins, to tell us some more about that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anita. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk about the programs administered and implemented by the Virginia Housing Development Authority. We're the state housing finance agency. We were created in 1972 by the Virginia General Assembly. We provide financing for rental housing opportunities here in the Commonwealth, as well as home ownership opportunities. And we also are increasingly involved in the financing of mixed-use, mixed-income developments, particularly in the context of helping to revitalize communities. So we view that as increasingly a very important tool in terms of our work, in terms of promoting sustainable communities here in the Commonwealth. As Anita mentioned, we are the allocating agency for the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program here in the Commonwealth, also referred to as the LIHTC program. LIHTC program is one of the most important affordable housing resources we have in the nation right now. Produces a significant number of affordable rental units. Here in Virginia, we have an ongoing schedule that we follow in terms of administration of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, under the principles of really promoting the most transparency possible in order that for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, and redevelopment and housing authorities all have the ability to access the program. But again, it is a very limited program, so certainly in terms of the amount of requests that we have per year, it is oversubscribed on an annual basis, which should not be a surprise in terms of an affordable housing resource. We have actually special pools that we've set aside, allocated to advance certain housing priorities here in the Commonwealth. We do have, for example, a public housing authority pool that's been very important in terms of advancing the work of redevelopment and housing authorities here in the Commonwealth when it comes to public housing transformation. We also have a pool that's allocated to support nonprofit organizations, and also a variety of regional pools as well that are really intended to address the special needs of regions here in the Commonwealth. So LIHTC is a very important part of what we do at VHDA, but also I want to talk about some of the financing that we provide through our organizational structure. As a state housing finance agency, we essentially place bonds out on the financial markets, and as a result of those bonds being purchased, we're able to essentially re-lend that money at a certain basis point month. And that's very important in terms of helping us be a self-supporting state housing finance agency, and we're to be able to really be able to operate in a manner that's supportive of the Commonwealth without us requiring any type of allocation from the General Assembly. The other thing that I'd like to mention is we're very much engaged in home ownership lending here in the Commonwealth. We think that's very important, particularly as millennial households are moving into home buyer situations. We have not only affordable mortgage lending programs that are provided through our network of mortgage lenders through the Commonwealth, but we also have a down payment assistance grant program, and we also have a mortgage credit certificate program. As you can imagine, a mortgage credit certificate is essentially a tax credit. I won't go into the details because, as you can understand, it's somewhat complicated, but we have an excellent video on bhda.com. And I would encourage any millennials, particularly that are looking at home ownership opportunities, to take a look at the home ownership lending we have available, grant programs, and also we're very much involved in what we term housing education here in the Commonwealth. We operate a homeownership education program, again, through our network of nonprofit and local government providers and redevelopment and housing authorities and even for-profit entities. And we educate approximately 17,000 Virginians per year in homeownership. Very important part of what we do, and about 3/4 of those participants attend our online program. So very important part of what we're doing to advance housing opportunities here in Virginia.
So you can tell this is a complicated field because people are in all different kinds of stages of life and looking for different kinds of housing and have different needs for affordable housing. So turning to the local level, let me ask Stacy Pethio, who's the housing coordinator for the city of Charlottesville, to tell us a little more about some of their programs. That's right.
And so
After all the trouble we went to get to it, I'm gonna get it.
I manage the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund. That was created back in 2007. It pulled together several different funding streams that the city already had in place. To pool the money together to help support production and preservation of affordable housing opportunities in the city. This upcoming fiscal year, we've just been allocated $3.4 million into the fund. So obviously we can't do a lot with that. We try to limit investment of those funds to about $30,000 maximum per unit. We can get more bang out of those $3.4 million if it is packaged into other funding sources like supporting LIHTC developments, if there are other foundations that contribute to the total budget of the development. We use it not only to support development, but also preservation. So one of the local nonprofits here, Albemarle Housing Improvement Program, they provide homeowner rehabilitation services, so we provide funding to them on an annual basis. We work with Habitat for Humanity to provide affordable homeownership options within the city. And this fiscal year, we actually provided $900,000 to the Housing Authority to support and expand their Housing Choice Voucher program. That program has been consistently defunded over the last several years. So they have a waiting list, which I think is about 8 years long.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So instead of having families sitting on that waiting list waiting for a voucher to come up, which doesn't happen frequently, the $900,000 that we have given them will help draw people down from that waiting list. The program is separate from the federal program, and we arranged it so that anyone who receives a city rental voucher assistance can also remain on the waiting list. So when a federal voucher becomes available, they can move back over to the federal program. That funding is obviously a bigger pot than we have that is more sustainable over the long term. I don't know, was I supposed to talk about anything else?
No, that's great. Okay. And then Vice Mayor Heather Hill was going to talk about an idea that's been floated around how we might dedicate more money into affordable housing.
Sure, so as Dr. mentioned, there's funding that we have allocated, but it isn't going to be enough to really chip away as much as we really need to put a more considerable investment in. And so we are looking at policies where a percentage of new tax revenue that's generated by for-profit development be then allocated to these funds, so that we can just say that a portion of what we're going to do. And so my colleague, Councilor Galvin, has been researching how other municipalities have been doing this and pursuing such a strategy, and an example that has come up is the Columbia Pike model, which is in Arlington County, and they channel incremental tax revenue generated by this redevelopment and those rising assessments back into these qualified census tracts. So it's really just how do we transition these for-profit projects into a way that we're now reinvesting in the communities that surround them. For example, a lot of the feedback that we get is when you're doing development adjacent to certain neighborhoods, you're now going to rise the value of those homes, which could be then pushing people out of their homes. And then we as a city then also need to look at how are we going to be adjusting some of our tax relief programs to be really targeted to those areas so that that is not a consequence of what we're trying to do in terms of the development. And so we're looking at corridors, so here in the city, Preston Avenue, as well as this Water Street corridor, as areas that as redevelopment takes place, other proportions of the profits or the revenues that are coming from those projects that will commit a percentage to going right back into affordable housing fund. Another proposal that another colleague of mine, Dr. Bellamy, has put forward is related to a specific parcel, which generated a lot of discussion when we were getting ready to vote on this city-owned project. It's just allocating that, maybe 100% of those revenues coming from that project alone, then be leveraged in order to float a bond to really make a meaningful step in redevelopment of public housing. So these are things that we're all continuing to, a lot of the folks on this table, we continue to engage with us and really evaluate the feasibility, but it really is going to take these creative solutions in order for us to really put it in this really big issue. As I campaigned last year, this was the #1 issue that I heard throughout this community.
So Phil Duranzio is chairman of the Housing Advisory Committee that advises the City Council, and also a mortgage banker. So you see it from a couple different ways, but he was going to talk about the land bank that's underway.
Thank you. So I am Phil Duranzio. I'm wearing, I think, 3 hats, which is one, I am the CEO of Pilot Mortgage, which is a Charlottesville-based broker and lender. We've been here in the city for 18 years. I am the chair of the Housing Advisory Committee, or HAC, which has sort of earned me the not-so-affectionate term head hacker. And I'm also here to speak on the land bank proposal, which is making its way to City Council right now. So in 2016, the state legislature passed enabling legislation for a land bank corporations to be started principally by local entities. And it's sort of another tool in the toolbox for providing ways of coming at land use, growth, and development projects. Richmond, I think, beat us to the punch just barely in getting one stood up, and they have organized one. There's also a second one that is in Christiansburg that is way back in the background. But a land bank is designed to be able to actually take possession of land from a wide variety of sources and then clear things like liens and difficulties with it and then repurpose it. And it is empowered to do a whole variety of things depending on how the ordinance is written, to issue bonds, to put restrictions on the sale and disposition of property, to take property into its possession, to develop on the land itself, and then to coordinate with other entities, for example, land trusts, redevelopment housing authorities, and such like. And as I said, we have an ordinance now that is up next week for consideration by the council. And I was literally back and forth on email just before I got here, sort of figuring out the last bits and pieces of that as we speak. So we're hopeful of that, and we'll move
Hyde is the housing chief, and he would share with us some of the county's approaches to affordable housing.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take a little bit different tack. I think it probably goes along with what Heather was talking about and involving the private sector. That's the importance of the public-private partnerships. And I'll give you a couple of some examples that are very active in the county. One is our partnership with the nonprofit community. Some of this is through funding that comes through block grants for housing rehabilitation. or for other community improvement projects. Some of it is through the tax credit program, where developers are building multifamily developments in the county. Just recently got involved in a pretty strong public-private partnership with a developer to essentially donate back the increased taxes from the based on the valuation of the improvements. This was necessary. Most projects start hitting the ground 2 or 3 years before the ground breaks. You're putting together pro formas, things change. In the case of this, the talk of tax reform created a problem with the value of tax credits. And this development was very important to the county, 96 units, affordable housing for 30 years. And the drop in the value of the tax credits, created a situation where to save that development, we worked with the developer, came forward with a performance agreement that will actually get it done. I talked to the developer yesterday and he just pulled his building permit, so we're moving along with that. We've also entered into what is probably going to be a long-term public-private partnership arrangement with Habitat for Humanity for the redevelopment of a 350-unit mobile home park just south of the city. That's an ongoing project. Well, we're just in the planning stages now, but certainly an ongoing project that is going to take a lot of investment, federal, state, and also local. So I think those are the types of things that we're going to see more of going forward, rather than just a reliance on federal and state grants and other programs.
Certainly, as the tap gets turned tighter and tighter, that's really all you can do, is to look to other sources. So let me just bring in the private sector, and Maurice Perry is here from the Bank of America. If you could tell us, from a lender standpoint and a CDC perspective.
Sure. Thank you. I'm with Bank of America Community Development lending team, as well as my role at the bank. I actually work for the Community Development Corporation. Bank of America is one of the last banks that actually has an active real estate development group that does affordable housing. So I see it from both ends, see with my lending partners, with how they underwrite deals, and I also have to go to them for lending as well. But to piggyback on what other folks were saying, so once you receive your tax credits from VACA, then Bank of America and other large institutions either will purchase those tax credits as a tax benefit and provide direct equity to affordable housing projects, or in the instance of Bank of America, we also work with other syndicators around the country who actually invest in tax credits as well. We also are a construction lender, so we specifically underwrite and provide construction financing for affordable housing projects. And then we also have, not necessarily in this market, because VACA has a very competitive and very good program in terms of 4% bonds as well as permanent financing. We also provide permanent financing for certain projects depending upon the need there. So, in terms of, there is definitely an appetite at the bank and all larger institutions to do affordable housing and to purchase tax credits. And as Ron indicated, the market has changed a little bit since the tax changes. However, Bank of America is still actively pursuing purchasing tax credits for affordable housing projects throughout the country and in the Commonwealth.
So Melissa Maddox Evans is General Counsel for the Charleston Housing Authority. She bring us some new ideas from South Carolina.
Thank you.
Beautiful city. Beautiful city y'all have.
Thank you so much. As is Charlottesville. Yes, served as general counsel, I've had a few hats too, was CEO for the Charleston County Housing Redevelopment Authority, and also currently serve as the chair and president of the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation, which the city of Charleston funds, a nonprofit, so I'll explain what that's all about. So our housing authority for the city of Charleston serves a little over 4,000 families. Our primary sources of funding, of course, are our public housing program, over 1,400 public housing units, our HCV program, Housing Choice Voucher, over 1,569 vouchers, included in that number is about 300 vouchers for veterans under the Veterans Assistance for Housing Program, which we're very proud of in our partnership with the VA there. We serve a number of variety of families across the spectrum. We also have about 900 units under our housing finance agency, which is our what we affectionately call our cash cow, to help supplement our federally subsidized programs when we need to reach for those funds through different acquisitions we did over the years, different properties. We still set the requirements, the income requirements are targeting workforce families, persons within the 60 to 100% of the area median income, to target that population that we may not be otherwise able to through our traditional programs. But because of of course, the instability of federal funds and the future that we see on the horizon with regards to the sentiment that on federal level from our legislators, anyone from HUD here? As you know, through proposed budget, a number is like zero for the capital fund program, which fortunately did not pass the omnibus bill, and other horrendous, numbers we see right on the wall. So HUD likes the rental assistance demonstration program. So we are moving our housing authority in that direction to convert our housing portfolio, which allows us to enter into partnerships with public and nonprofit investors to be able to convert our public housing portfolio to project-based Section 8 units with those long-term contracts. So we're doing that with our public housing portfolio. So hopefully, because we see the numbers for RAD going up while the numbers for public housing, are kind of scary. Also on a legislative level, we are pushing for, and of course with our various partners, inclusionary zoning. There's a lot of development in Charleston. So hopefully we are pushing forward with those efforts so that developers could allocate at least 25% of their portfolio to affordable housing. If they don't want to do that, they can pay a fee in lieu of. We only have a couple small zones within Charleston that allow for that, but we want that expanded. And also, one legislator has an affordable housing bill, just for a pure housing allocation we're excited about. So we're hoping for that. The city of Charleston created a nonprofit, a separate nonprofit. It's not an affiliate subsidiary now, it's an independent organization called the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation, which has created the Palmetto Community Land Trust. So I was happy this morning to meet with Christine Dickers to find out what y'all are doing with your land trust here. So we, in partnership with the city, the Housing Authority, and the Historic Charleston Foundation, which are sort of the founding members that comprise that trust, and several stakeholders within the community form the board members of that trust. We created a separate private organization to be able to acquire land, put it under the trust, so that it can remain in the trust in perpetuity, and then we can build homes on that land and sell them to homeowners, but under a new homeownership model, not a fee simple homeownership model that everyone is familiar with, but there will be 99-year leases. So essentially, you pretty much own the home for your life. You can, transfer the homes to your loved ones, family members, or whomever, and as long as they, stay within the income requirements. So that helps us reach persons within the 60 to 150% of the AMI. So just another bracket. So we started that, created that a couple years ago, and are in the process of our initial acquisition, so we're excited about that. Funds for that are from the CDBG grants. The city, we were awarded several different nonprofit organizations that focus on affordable housing that we've applied for grants for that were awarded. And the city's old UDAG funds, which are urban development action grant funds, which were used to build the nice, pretty, fancy Charleston Place Hotel downtown that you might have stayed at if you come to visit us, 5-star hotel. They paid us some money back. So and out of that pot, there's $22 million that nonprofits can apply for affordable housing and others. So we're in line to get about $400,000 from that. So we're excited.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're very happy to have with us Anthony Williams, the former mayor of Washington, D.C., and now head of the Federal City Council. So, Mayor Lenz, can we ask you just to offer up some of the ideas that you've seen being a finance guy yourself originally?
I came into finance from housing. I've been involved in some aspect of housing now. I was thinking about this. It's scary for about 40 years now. Since I was in college, I was involved in projects around my college. I represented the local area while I was in college on the local board of aldermen. It was called alderpersons now. So got involved in housing. I was actually told by someone I worked for way back in the day at a place called the Boston Redevelopment Authority, which is a very well-regarded housing outfit in Boston, started by the great Ed Lowe. And this guy, Steve Quill, told me that the best way to get into development is through housing, because housing is extraordinarily complicated and demanding. A 10-unit apartment building is just as complicated sometimes as, a 400,000 square foot building, because all those hard costs and all those issues are embedded in every project. So it's a great way to get into the world of development, and for me, get into the world of finance. And over these 40 years, I've learned one thing that from a philosopher, Ethel Washington, who ran my mother's beauty shop. So what do I mean by that? Well, my mother would take us home for practice, and we would stop at the beauty shop, Ethel's beauty shop. And she had this great sign on the wall in the beauty parlor that I'll never forget. And it said, "Remember, ladies, you must have enough hair for the style you want. We are beauticians, not magicians." I think my big overarching caution I would give to anybody thinking about housing, whether it's a small city, medium-sized city, or a large city, is understand your economy and understand the background economics of your city, your neighborhood, the project site, before you go into housing, because all the programs we're talking about are really doing gap financing. You're drafting on the underlying economy. So you need to know as you begin your project. I'll give you an example, and then I'll shut up. As mayor, I brought together our planning people and our development people. Having come out of a planning development background, I got this, We looked at the four, Washington's 10 by 10, Virginia, you guys left, we don't blame you. But it's basically the diamond, and we have northwest quadrant, northeast, southwest, southeast. We looked at the city. We basically, it could be said now, I would not have said it then because it would have been too controversial, but we broke the city down into essentially 3 topologies. It was northwest part of the district, heavy demand, middle part of the district, right ahead of the wave, where demand was incipient but not yet started, and then over in southeast, right, in what I would call an incentive economy. You had to create incentives for investment. So think about it, if you're doing housing, you're thinking about different types of housing programs you've all heard here in different types of those topologies. So for example, if you're in a demand economy where demand is very, very high, you can sit and intelligently talk about something like inclusionary zoning, because developers want to be there so much, they're willing to pay a penalty and exaction in terms of inclusionary zoning. And even though inclusionary zoning, all of us would say sometimes is not very economically efficient, sometimes for intangible cosmetic, and I don't say it pejoratively cosmetic, but what's the word? Aesthetic. Symbolic reasons you want inclusionary zoning in the building, even though it may be more costly, because you want to show that the city is a city for all people. Then right at the wave, you're providing a different kind of incentive, right? Because the the land assembling, the land acquisition may be cheaper because the wave hasn't quite hit yet, and yet you still have that demand. And you go over in the southeast, that's where you're doing projects, and I haven't heard that talked about, but a big project we worked on that has now been discontinued. Leave it to the federal government to have a project that work and then discontinue it. I thought the Hope 6 program was a wonderful program for those of you who don't know Hope 6. A lot of us who were in this business for years complained about how we were stuck on stupid with our public housing program, and we didn't allow for mixed income communities on our public housing sites. Now, a lot of people criticize Hope 6, but Hope 6 was an attempt to provide a mix of investment into a public housing site where you could provide something very, very powerful for a Tony Williams who was 7 years old, and that is a role model in his community now because you had a mix of incomes in the community. And I'm very proud that in Washington, D.C., we went from, we had one started to one of the top cities in the country for bringing Hope 6s into the city. And very importantly, we went from pretty much all displacement in our initial projects to one-for-one replacement of our one-for-one replacement of our low-income units in the last project. Another thing you can do with an incentive demand economy, and I'll leave this thought, is there was a big complaint about gentrification. I set a goal of bringing 100,000 new people to Washington, D.C., and a way to try to link that to housing development is we created a housing production trust fund. We essentially levied an excise tax on the recordation of deeds because, as you know, back in the day, especially before the collapse, there was a huge churning of real estate in cities like Washington, D.C., where basically every deed was basically being financed and essentially being re-recorded. We raised $350 million for housing in that fund. So the good news is we raised a lot of money in that fund. The bad news is it didn't go as far as it maybe should go, and we can talk about new strategies and new approaches, but understand your economy, understand the economics of your neighborhood before you craft and design your housing program.
And if we could turn now to the practitioners who try to put together all these different sources and make the affordable housing actually work. I'll turn to Ned Howe from Enterprise Homes.
Thank you. Hopefully some people are familiar with Enterprise. I won't do the song and dance here, but certainly go online and figure it out. We're pretty prominent in the affordable housing industry, and we have many companies that do many things within our organization. I am just part of the development group, so we're an on-the-ground actual development entity as part of the Enterprise group. We did do a Hope 6 project in New York City, sir. And so when we go down the list of financing choices, I mean, I can go through the plethora, LIHTC, tax-exempt bonds, GSE debt, home, CDBG, federal home loan bank, housing trust funds, every acronym known to man. I'm sure we have put in one of our deals at some point in time. I used to laugh, some of them we would have, I think a record we had was up to 9 sources in just one deal. So trying to cobble these things together, we kind of call them snowflakes, because every one of them is different. Like you alluded to, the neighborhoods are different, the dynamics are different, the people you're trying to serve is different, the product's different. So we're always trying to be innovative in what we do and how we do it. So with that, I was going to tell you about one that we're doing now, and with a lot of the resources that we do use are certainly getting, let's just say, lessened or not quite available as they once were. We're having to get more and more creative. And one example right now that I was going to give you is we just finished an acquisition of 300 units of affordable housing in our founder Jim Rouse's city of Columbia, Maryland. So it kind of had something close to home for Enterprise. And in that acquisition, there was a nonprofit that owned these 300 units, and they had put out an RFP wanting someone to take it over. This nonprofit was basically a group of 5, an attorney, a contractor, whatever, on a board that really did not want to be in an ownership position of 300 affordable units where they really understand it, but they were in that position and wanted to get out. So first and foremost, they wanted to get out. Secondly, they wanted to preserve and redevelop. These units were built in the 60s, so they're basically functionally obsolete. But they serve a tremendous need. All 300 units are affordable. 2/3 of them have project-based subsidy. The rest are income restricted. They want to continue that. But they have become run down and they become kind of an eyesore to the neighborhood and a concern. So they felt the best way to do was to try to come with a mixed income approach. So they wanted someone that was willing to scrape and redevelop these sites, and then they wanted to, I guess, extract some of the equity from the deal to be able to serve other affordable housing needs because it has low leverage. The one neat thing was it's been around for so long, it has plenty of income. They've been generating plenty of resources, so they were sitting on cash and they had very little debt. So, but they were trying to figure out what to do with this. So if you do a scrape, the answer is the dirt is worth less than it is as a dilapidated development getting project-based subsidies. So how do you deal with that? So we came up with a unique structure to say, okay, we'll take it, we will give you the value based on the income that you have now, but if you want us to scrape and redevelop, you guys take back the note. You are now a lender rather than an owner, and as we redevelop, you convert that note to a soft mortgage. So it's kind of a neat concept, and I can't say that the story is over because we're just in the middle of it right now, but we're getting ready to put 2 9% tax credit applications in, and try to access that and be able to use the equity that's been generated from this development over a number of years and be able to turn that around and make it a source for being able to redevelop the site as a true mixed income. When we say true mixed income, we're not talking about a dribble of 10% of market rate units. We're talking really a 50-50 split and really trying to have a stratification of incomes that go across the full spectrum. So we've always had a difficult time trying to do that. So we hope this comes to fruition, and we're still every day coming up with a new problem. But hopefully we'll get an application in and really do something innovative. And the neat thing is, if we do this right, the only thing we'll have is tax credit money in it, and their soft debt, and then a very large first mortgage from a GSE enterprise or FHA type mortgage, and we will not be using soft sources from other entities. So if it all works out, I mean, the good news is Columbia has been a very, very successful design, and it is very, very high demand, and we really believe that we can get true market rate rents for these units. Now, whether investors believe that or not, that's a whole other story.
Great. We'll probably go back through that in more detail as we move into discussion. I wanted to just briefly have some of the nonprofit actors who are here on the ground working affordable housing every day here in Charlottesville tell us a little bit about their projects or their how they go about financing their efforts. So Julie Anderson is here for Virginia Supportive Housing.
So Virginia Supportive Housing is a nonprofit formed in 1988 with a mission to end homelessness, and we do that by providing permanent supportive housing. Our focus is mainly single homeless adults and low-income adults. So we're developing studio apartments, generally 80 units, a 60,000 square foot building. And like you've already heard, we're cobbling together pretty much all of the sources that have been mentioned so far. Low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, solar tax credits where applicable, state home housing trust fund, national housing trust fund, AHP, CDBG, all of them. And like you mentioned, your 9 sources. My most recent project has 17 sources.
Or you lose, depending on which way.
I would love to do it with a solid, big, easy 5 sources. It definitely complicates the project. It creates a longer timeline while we're trying to get commitments and agreements and close, creates more compliance for my team as far as reporting, and also my property management team. So we own and manage all of our units, about 620 so far across the state of Virginia, from here to Virginia Beach. And so when I turn that project over to my property management team with 17 different sources and compliance, they're not always happy with me. So,
And Sunshine Mathan is relatively new executive director of the Piedmont Housing Alliance and facing a lot of these issues now as he has older developments facing redevelopment or needing redevelopment.
So I'm gonna, again, my name is Sunshine Mathan. I'm a relatively recent transplant from Austin, Texas, where I was there for 14 years doing affordable housing work there. So I'm actually going to take a slightly different tack to, because a lot of what's been said I would otherwise repeat in terms of funding sources and such. So I want to talk about parallels between what I see between Austin and the work there and what we see here. I'm gonna play a little fast and loose with numbers just to make things round. So generally speaking, Austin's about 20 times larger than Charlottesville. It has also, roughly speaking, about 20 times the annual budget as Charlottesville. When Austin went through its own housing needs assessment process about 3 years ago, I'm suspecting, based on what we find from Anita here shortly, that we'll see a similar ratio of need, roughly a 20 times gap in terms of the number of affordable housing units that were needed to meet the need. In Austin, when we went through that assessment, if the answer was to just build our way out of the problem, it was somewhere between $4 and $6 billion to build our way through it, which was roughly equivalent to a year or a year and a half of the entire city budget. So this is where I'm going to play a little bit fast and loose. If we assume that 20%, the 20 times factor plays a role here, in Charlottesville that translates to $200 to $300 million to build our way out of the issue, and that does not include redevelopment of CRHA properties or Friendship Court. That's independent from the redevelopment. So that is roughly speaking 1 to 1.5 times what the city annual budget is in Charlottesville. So it can't be just build only. There's a key piece. So that was one of the biggest talking points as we talked about our strategic housing plan, is that we can't just be looking at the housing component. We have to be looking at how to address the root causes of poverty in the first place. And you have to be looking at incentivizing and bringing and supporting the production of living wage jobs. And that fundamentally you can't solve the problem without addressing it from both ends of that spectrum. And the issue is also not just about quantity. It's not just about raw numbers of units and how much money exactly. It's about how and where. So one of the other similarities between Charlottesville and Austin is both cities suffer from a legacy of development patterns rooted in a history of structural racism. And Austin, by many measures, is the most economically segregated city in the country. And that is because of the policies and procedures that the city councils in the not too distant past, back into the 1930s, certainly into urban renewal as well, but particularly back in the 1930s, established patterns of development that kept poor people here and white wealthy people over here. And I bring that up because as Austin is looking at how to address this affordable housing crisis, again, it's not just about numbers, it's about where and how. So one of the questions that gets asked is, one of the monikers that gets used a lot is all kinds of housing for all kinds of people in all kinds of places. And one of the ways of doing that is to ask each neighborhood, each kind of group of neighbors in a certain region, and put the question to them and said, our city is growing, we have an affordable housing crisis, so where are you going to put your share of growth and affordability? Basically implying that it's everyone's responsibility in every neighborhood, no matter how old and established they are, that they need to be addressing that problem as much as anybody else. And so some of the ways that was being addressed, or that questions are being asked and getting to the kind of the minutia of it, is there's a big push for smaller lots and smaller houses, disincentivizing $1 million homes so you can build more units. And that, when you talk about older established neighborhoods, that's the only way to really do that. And then the other piece of it was identifying what they're calling fair housing corridors, which is looking at the transportation corridors in the city, and particularly those areas which are typically whiter and wealthier, establishing corridors with a direct intentionality to make sure that you start to disperse affordability throughout the city and start to break down the divides that historically divided the cities. I'll leave that set of comments there. The other three kind of straight up financing mechanisms that I'll throw out there that are kind of on the new innovative edge for lots of different places. One in conjunction with land banks is Austin is also in the process of developing a strike fund, which essentially would allow the city, an independent entity, connected to the city, but independent entity, so that when a piece of land that looks like it's ideal for affordable housing or is existing naturally occurring affordable housing and is at risk for being lost, that the city has a fund available to strike and grab it before it gets lost. Or strike and grab it so it can be redeveloped as at least mixed income or affordable housing. So the strike fund is a key part of the land bank strategy. You have the money for the land bank to do its job. Another is impact fees, and this is, some cities around the country have started doing this. I heard a conversation right before the panel started where that idea was brought up, where essentially any development within a city, not just the residential component, not just where you have density bonuses on multifamily developments, but any development in the city fundamentally contributes to the affordable housing crisis one way or another. So even commercial development that then brings in jobs, well, that brings in people from the outside, which then impacts the affordability and availability of homes. Everyone needs to be playing ball, and so impact fees cut across the board. And what the right number is, I don't know. But one example is for every square foot of development, there's $1 added onto that. So if you have 100,000 square foot development, commercial, hotel, whatever, they pay $100,000 into the affordable housing fund. So everyone's contributing to that to grow that pot. And the last piece, which is not applicable in all situations, but is kind of a pay for success or social impact bond model that a lot of cities have been using. And it's a way to get untraditional funders into the affordable housing realm, or in not just affordable housing. It can be early childhood centers, it can be sobriety centers, it can be a bunch of different things. But it oftentimes allows medical institutions, the court systems, those entities that otherwise have significant financial burdens from people who are on the streets, and homeless or things along those lines, so that when they get housed, those cost burdens are no longer hitting them, and so they contribute to the housing to get people off the street. And so it's a way of bridging untraditional sources. I'll leave it there.
Last but not least, John Desmond is here from the Habitat for Humanity of Greater Charlottesville and deals with a slightly different aspect of the problem.
Habitat for Humanity is a home ownership program. And so families come to us earning between 25 and 60% of area median income. We work with them to help them get their credit straightened out and prepare them for home ownership. They then work alongside volunteer labor to build their home. And at the end of the process, they close on and they buy their home and they pay for it. The journey to get there, though, is a little torturous. In this area, land is very, very expensive and there's not a lot of it. And we're grateful for the support of our partners at the city and at the county for providing funds for the acquisition of land. That's very helpful to us. Once we get the land, then we go through the process of the alphabet soup of programs that we find through HUD to attempt to finance that along with donations. And then at the end of the process, we have a mortgage for that family, and our partners at VHDA provide financing so that we can borrow against that mortgage, turn that money around, put it back into the program, and build more homes. In addition to that, VHDA provides a great deal of support to us relative to the servicing of these mortgages. It's a huge job. We've sold 200 homes over our existence since 1991, and so the mortgage portfolio is very large, and that's a lot to deal with, and they don't charge us anything for that, and so we're grateful. So VHDA, with coming from the state, the city and the county locally providing funds, and then of course HUD on the federal level. Ron mentioned our development at Southwood. That is 120 acres. We have 350 trailers. We are going to redevelop that property without displacing residents. It will become mixed use and it's mixed rate, so there is a market rate component as well as an affordable component. And we will come out on the other side of that project, increasing the stock of affordable housing in the area. We have just started the entitlement process, and we're grateful to the support from Ron and his team at the county for making that a unique process and working with us to figure out how to get a really great project for this community. So it's very difficult, and I think as Sunshine mentioned, we're not going to build our way out of this problem. We build 20 homes a year, and that takes a lot of people doing a lot of things right to make that work. And so we're also exploring some of the underpinnings of the problems that people face when they walk in our door, the credit problems that they have, and we're exploring different ways to come up with different lending options for folks, potentially through the development of a CDFI, where you can get a reasonable interest loan. You're not paying a car loan at 24%. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy that's just not going to pan out well for people. And so we have to figure out not only how to build through what we're trying to do, but also to help people create a financial structure for themselves that's tenable. And we also think that's going to help a lot. So that's what we're hoping.
So let's open it up to the panel. One of the issues that we've talked about a little bit was the impact of the Tax Reform Act on LIHTC and the demand for those. Maurice, can you just explain to folks about the issue once the tax rates were cut? What happened to the demand for credits?
I'll try to. It's a little complicated on my end too. So. But I think essentially the price that investors were willing to pay was based upon what their tax burden was. And now that their tax burden is less, those credits are now worth less. And so the price has come down. So corporations that were paying, over 30% tax burden now are down to, I forget what it is, 22 or 25, whatever the final number was. So now that, as a result of that, the pricing has come down, and so what the actual property gets, as opposed to getting, in some instances, we're getting $1 for some transactions, depending upon the market. I'm not too sure what it was specifically in this region, but now those numbers are now around 96 cents or something. So as a result, developers have to go and find a resource to fill that.
Can I follow up on that just a second, just to put some real numbers to that? So in projects that I was working on in Austin before I came here, before Trump was president and before the promise of a tax bill coming, we were seeing $1.10 on the dollar. When that after the tax bill passed, it ended up being around 85 to 88 cents on the dollar. But what that translates to in real numbers for a project the scale of like a 120 or 130 unit tax credit development, that's about $3 million in gap that just grew essentially overnight in development terms.
So I think it's incumbent on people in the housing field to really be working on when there are changes to the tax bill, which there have to be a lot of technical problems with it, to see that, especially if it's post-November, I won't get into politics, see that there are changes to the tax bill in the ways that you're discussing, either by changing the CRA requirements of banks who do banks do very well, no offense, but banks do very well in the tax bill, and their CRA requirements have not been adjusted for the benefit they got from the tax bill. Oh, the CRA is, after a long story of agitation, there was an act passed called the Community Reinvestment Act, which really told banks that out of your lending, you've got to deploy some of your assets in areas that otherwise would be abandoned or neglected, right? Roughly. So banks are doing really well from the tax bill. You would argue that their requirements now ought to go up in commensurate fashion, let alone how you adjust the other aspects of the bill.
So with the cuts then in resources coming from LIHTC and from federal budget lines, are we seeing the philanthropic sector responding and stepping up to help fill those gaps? Julie, you're in the market all the time.
I don't know how long that will last, but we have had good luck. We had a project that went from $1.04 per credit to 94 cents, leaving us with a gap of about $1 million. And we were actually awarded our single largest award to date of $1 million. And we're able to take 800 of that for our project. So that was a big help for us. And that's part of that 17 sources I'm talking about is, different foundations and different donors.
Other folks, Ned, have you had any luck?
We haven't had much activity on the foundation side. So. I've been, unfortunately, I've only been doing this for 10 years, but in the 10 years, when I came in, the tax credit pricing was right around $1, and then we had a little episode in 2007 that it went down to about 65 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Then it creeped back up to over $1 again, and now we had a little episode to knock it back down again. So, this is just part of the undulation of the industry we go through. We find ways to fill those gaps. Often, depending on how far you are in the process, people have an understanding and acknowledgement of what has happened, and then try to find other resources to make up for that. But you have to be able to adjust to the landscape because that's really.
I'd like to challenge that a little bit, though. Which is, just in the sense that I agree that what we've seen over the last 15 years in terms of fluctuations has followed. So in 2007, 2008, when we saw the economic downturn and we saw credit pricing drop precipitously, well, we also saw land costs drop precipitously. We also saw construction costs drop precipitously, and we're not in that situation now. Where we are right now is that the credit pricing has dropped, but those other things are still going up. So that we're not seeing the natural trend that we have, I think, historically.
I agree with that. And then the other thing, we've been in pretty historically low interest rates, which has been somewhat helpful throughout this whole process.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that we've seen, yes, an increased interest in nonprofits dedicated to affordable housing work. Last November, fortunately, a $20 million bond was passed specifically for affordable housing through the city of Charleston.
Secured by property taxes?
Yes. And so, which we were very happy that our electorate voted for that. So what we've also seen that has been very interesting to us through meetings that the Charleston Redevelopment Corporation has, our nonprofit, and speaking with different stakeholders in the community, particularly the larger corporations that are moving into the community, that they are becoming very interested in the affordable housing issue because we have employers like Boeing now, Volvo, Mercedes, and lots of big corporations in addition to our ones that have been there for years, MUSC or big hospital, that they are experiencing affordable housing crises among their employees. And that they are having employees having to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours of or more to work every day, and that it's impacting their workforce. And so we're having those discussions also because some of these corporations own land. And also have funds to be able to specifically designate towards affordable housing. So to create incentives for their workers, maybe with through down payment assistance or other ideas to be able to spark some affordable housing growth. So that's something that we're tapping into now since they're moving to our area.
That's an important aspect because certainly it's affecting the whole economy, the people's ability to find housing near their work.
And I'd just like to follow on Melissa's comments. One of the things that we've seen in previous work experiences has been the use of municipal bonds coming to the table to help offset the cost for, in this case, obviously, affordable housing, used it in other arenas. The beauty of a bond versus a pledge of tax revenue is that the bond is a lasting instrument. A pledge from a council to set aside some tax revenue lasts as long as that council is there. And I know councils are well intentioned and everything. No, the bond obligation is a 15, 20-year obligation. Now, at the end of that period, those resources that you've otherwise tied up free up, come back into the general fund. So it's not in perpetuity. Also, when you use those funds to supplement and provide affordable housing, it's essentially community reinvestment that should bring some additional value to the tax base as a whole. From my perspective, with the housing authority, I'm very much interested in affordable housing. I'm absolutely passionate about low-income housing. We talk about the low-income housing tax credit as though it's somewhat of a magic bullet. It's not. It doesn't reach the extremely affordable areas that the people we serve need. And so there is a need for additional investment, and I would argue public investment to help offset those needs.
Which is a role, unfortunately, that was once filled by the federal government. It's now abandoned that role. Social insurance and social services are best done on a national platform so that one city that has a heart isn't at a competitive disadvantage to a city that really doesn't give a damn. That's a shame. It's a shame.
Well, and I'm sorry, and I'll put it down after this, but Anthony, you're absolutely right. As you well know, I mean, when the LIHTC legislation passed in the mid '86, right? We had a federal infrastructure, a social net that is much, much different than it is today. So someone earning 60% of AMI with other federal supports can move into low-income tax credit housing. Today, those supports are gone. There's been the stagnation and separation of wages and in the middle class. Now the people that we see being served by LIHTCs really aren't the people that the program was ever envisioned initially to serve. And it's left a tremendous gap there.
So since I've been out of office, I've had the opportunity to work with the London School of Economics. We've traveled to a lot of cities around the world in emerging countries. These are cities with ghastly levels of poverty and inequality in these cities. And in many cases, the governments are very unstable because there's no stable middle class in the country to underlie a stable democracy. And then people go, oh, what happened? There's continual overthrow of the government because there's no middle class, there's no upward mobility to the middle class, and I really fear for that.
Right.
It's really, you would think if I were wealthy, you would think it's in my interest to see that there are these investments to see that we maintain a stable middle class and upward mobility. It's in your own stupid self-interest.
Right. Right.
I was just going to ask about the location efficiency that's been alluded to, but in terms of finance, obviously where housing is located, as you mentioned, is key, and especially when you talk about the affordability index, which has the affordability of transportation thrown into that. Is there any extra kickers or incentive from a financing to get those aspects or to get the housing benefited from location benefits? Great question.
I just add, for what it's worth, at the bank, when we just don't invest in any project, we also like to look holistically at what's going on in the community. So, an affordable project that's next to a good school or a new charter school, those are the type of investments we like to make, because as an investor, as a long-term tax credit investor, we're there for the next 15 or 20 years. And I think one of the things I would like to point out, and people have alluded to here, we need to start looking at this holistically. Just to have an affordable housing project in a low to moderate census tract, and there's no good schools, there's not good health care, we're perpetuating something, and those same folks are going to be there 20 years because we haven't offered them an opportunity to move their lives to a better place.
So to address that issue, it's actually a disincentive in operating in reverse on home ownership and qualification in lending, because there is no credit given to a borrower based on their transportation needs. So, for example, 10 years ago, when the market boomed here, there was that old drive until you qualify. So you went farther and farther away. Well, you do that, essentially what you are doing is incurring, whether you are financing the car or driving a beater, you are incurring a significant expense that is not leveraged into wealth. It is not leveraged in terms of tax deductibility or anything else. but it dribbles out of the pocket every other day when you go trooping over to the gas station to put $10 worth of gas into your car to get back and forth. And all of a sudden, in 2008, when gas goes to $4 a gallon, your affordable house 20 miles away, all of a sudden you can no longer afford to leave or return to. So there is a specific disincentive in that sense.
Part of our discussions with the corporations that I mentioned earlier is to find out also what their plans are for growth and expansion. So as they move their bases and employment centers, we're talking with them so that we can know what areas to target and that's where we would like to build more affordable housing. And so that's the basis of our conversations with them because they're very interested in that. So hopefully funding can result from that.
I was just going to throw one other comment out there, and there's been also a critical shift in our industry with regard to where investment in affordable housing is going. Communities of opportunity, areas of opportunity, whatever name these municipalities are doing that. I'm going through right now in the state of Maryland. There's tremendous incentives to locate housing in areas where the program, the tax credit program, was always driven toward what's called QCTs, qualified census tracts, which are high poverty areas. Based on the court rulings on disparate impact, that there's been a significant shift in that investment. So the state of Maryland has offered a tremendous amount of points for their LIHTC program in this current round for areas of opportunity, communities of opportunity, where, to tell you the honest truth, from a social engineering aspect, we get it. But when the rubber meets the road and where we go, you might as well just put a bullseye on my front and just say, shoot me now, because I'm going out into very hostile environments trying to put housing in these areas. So it's very, very difficult. It's great if you can get away with it, but I'm sure we'll see a lot of awards that ultimately don't culminate into developments because they might not actually make it to the finish line. But it's a noble cause. I don't like the shift though so much to where it's the pendulum unfortunately swings too far on every one of these. And in the last round, in fact, 95% of the funding went into these communities of opportunity, and we almost banded the city of Baltimore and other areas that desperately need this funding as well. So I hope at some point in time the pendulum will swing back to where there's a balance. And I think that's what we need.
Yeah, Sunshine, we're certainly seeing here
feedback from the community that the concentration of poverty and moving them out of their traditional neighborhood is not necessarily as high on their list as it is for policy makers. Oh,
yeah, that's I think there's an inherent tension there between the legacy of the institutional racism that created the development patterns that we have now, and how in the face of lack of resources, those communities have come together and supported each other, and they have their own. They have in kind of informal structures for support for each other, for informal economies, all of that. Their families are there. So the idea of redeveloping and introducing wealthier white folks in particular, but it does address the issue to some extent of knitting the city back together, or knitting our cities back together in general, but it also introduces the risk of not physical displacement, but social displacement. And so there is, in any of the efforts that we have moving forward, whether it's the redevelopment of Friendship Court or redevelopment of public housing properties, that is one of the most important conversations we need to be having throughout that entire process. And I will say it's not a simple answer, but it requires explicit and intentional dialogue to get us to the right place.
I'll just follow one real quick point. There's the deconcentration of poverty issue. Every year I have to sign a statement that says, as I redevelop, deconcentration of poverty. I want someone to show me the deconcentration of affluence policy. I don't know, does it cut both ways? Is there just an assumption that a poor community is a bad community and an affluent community has it right? I don't know. And I get the underlying, but yeah.
Well, looking at this, the three zones that Mr. Williams talked about, how do we deal with these different elements across municipal lines? We have Charlottesville and Outlaw here in the room, and so the situation doesn't stop at the border. And so if we look at this, each of those demand lines, they would cut across a different geography and cut across the boundary. So how do we deal with the two different policies?
You want to answer that one?
That's a
That's a good one for the county.
I just heard something I didn't know, we have different policies. One of the things that we're doing now, we've got a regional committee, affordable housing committee that's working through the PDC. It includes the outlying rural counties that are part of the PDC. I think the city is ahead of the game with their housing survey. It's not something that we have done in the county, but I believe the urban area or the urban ring is certainly an important piece of that study. Maybe not so much the rural area, but certainly the urban ring. We've really got to define the need. It's not, we don't have the data to define the need and then to go out to the people who are going to help us address these needs, our private partners, the nonprofits, the developers, and find out what they need from the city and the county to be able to address the needs. We don't build housing. I think the housing authority would like to be doing some, but they haven't gotten there yet. But the city and the county doesn't build housing, so we're relying on the private sector. But we've got to know what incentives are necessary to provide to the private sector, whether they are policy incentives that can deal with land use and zoning, or whether they're monetary incentives. I would say in my 17 and a half years here, I'm sorry that I can't put the data in front of someone to say, this is what the needs are and this is how we need to address it. So we're working on that with the PDC. Then I think the next step is probably going to be the city and the county defining what work that comes out of the PDC to better deal with the urban ring and the city of Charlottesville. That would be my hope anyway.
I don't really have anything to add. Well, no, I mean, I think.
Remember the size of our city.
There's a lot of commuting, particularly from the urban ring, because I live out there, and so it's really it's difficult to come up with some sort of plan at the moment, because you're right, you guys don't know what you need housing-wise in the county. We're wrapping up our housing needs assessment at the moment. I've been working with our city attorney's office to compile a list of every piece of enabling legislation the state has for Charlottesville that we can use to incentivize, support, whatever you want to call it, affordable housing. So we're getting that together to present to City Council in the near future. And I think we need to better understand here in the city what the commuting patterns are like between the city of Charlottesville and the county. I don't think we have. We had a study done a couple of years ago. I don't think it was as comprehensive as we need it. Once we have all those pieces in place, it becomes a lot easier for us to coordinate development and projects throughout the urban ring.
One last question? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So I was wondering if anyone on the panel has any other examples of that.
And so when what you're talking about social impact bonds or equivalents or pay for success models. Is that what you're referring to? Well, there are no projects locally, but TJAC is working with a group. They've gotten a grant. They're working with a group out of DC to look right now at a pay for success model to address some of the homeless issues in the city. That it's in the preliminary stages, so there is not a project identified yet to move that along, but that discussion is in process, and there is, in fact, also supporting that to some extent, and I don't know the details, but there's actually a small group of professors at UVA who also specialize on that front as well, and so they're supporting in that. But other than that, I'm not aware of any other efforts locally in Charlottesville, but there is some work on the state level too. Other parts of the state.
Unrelated though, it's related to the last case, I just can't help this. We have to think about the community that we're serving, and most people don't really care where that dotted line is around the city, and I really wanna empower all of us to really think about how can we better partner not only with our city and our county, but our university to solve this regional crisis. Because I think so often this pressure is put on our 10.25 square miles, but we own this together, and like you said, the urban ring is not that much different than being in the city as a person who walked up your street in the city. Like, the next door over, those people care about the same concerns that the person next door done. They just happen to live on the other side of the line, and I think that we really, as elected officials, certainly I'm committed to figuring out ways that we can be more efficient and more partnering in how we tackle this, because it's a regional issue, it's not a city issue.
That is a perfect note to end on. Thank you all so much. This was very informative. Well moderated. Everybody was very disciplined, and we heard everything that we hoped to learn today. On Saturday morning, we're going to have an action forum that takes everything we've heard from all 6 panels and applies it to our region, not just our city. It's still, but to our region. One of the reasons that TJPDC is co-sponsoring this with us is that they are beginning that very initiative and are in discussions with the county and the city. We're on some steering committees that are going to try to take the head starts that the city had and expand it to become a truly regional perspective, because the solutions cannot happen just in the heart of this region. So with that, I thank you all very much for joining us. In about 10 minutes, we're going to have our final session for today, which is focused on community engagement. So we invite you to stay if you like, and we'll see you again tomorrow with the program as well.
Tomorrow. Right. Nicely done. Yeah, we need to get together.
Whenever you want.
Like an excuse to take a road trip.
You want to schedule time now?
Thank you so much.